Hello everyone, this is RaySpace here to catalog all the custom spacecraft I've made over the years with their fancy features. One thing that sets my Kerbal Space Program efforts apart from those of others is that I make custom parts in Blender that are meant for custom spacecraft, and of course that leads me to have an additional burden in that I have to justify all the numbers that go into each of these spacecraft. And usually when I introduce the spacecraft in videos initially, I talk about the choices that I've made as far as the numbers are concerned, and I do an initial test. That test often fails. I discuss what needs to be adjusted, and then I proceed from there. Generally, the ones that I'm going to be showing off are the ones that actually worked. The ones that I did early on didn't work so well, but that led to me understanding how to make things that actually work. And, you know, if you're wondering why don't I just make stuff in stock, well, I did, of course. I started in Kerbal Space Program a long time ago. So here we see a schematic compendium from October 2014, and this was mainly stock designs, though there were some mod parts. You can see this from 0.23.5 and 0.24.2. We didn't even have fairings at this time, and yeah, so maybe I can find one with the awkward strutted interstages. Yes, we see strutted interstages there, and nowhere in here will you see fairings. Nowhere will you see 3.75 meter parts, much less 5 meter parts. It's all 2.5 meter part maximum, and all the grisly details were listed here back 10 years ago when I was primarily doing stock. But there was this realism overhaul division. See, I was doing realism overhaul 10 years ago in 0.23.5, and I listed the mods dutifully, and these were realism overhaul command pods and realism overhaul engines. You see the RL10s and the LR89s and stuff like that. And so it goes. I have done my time with the stockish parts. These, of course, were procedural parts and procedural wings, ultimately. That's a MechJeb controller right there. So yeah, though here we have a Rockamax 56-8U for the Whack Corporal for some reason. I guess I had to use that. So this is a 97-page document with all of these things here. After all of that, I decided to finally learn Blender and come up with my own stuff. I made a schematic compendium more recently, so we should take a look at that. So I call this Raised Aerospace Designs, and this is from April 2022, and this will include a lot of the ones that I show off today, but I've done more. I, in fact, won't even show the Lynx spacecraft because that's too basic. I will show the upgraded version of the Shinkansen spaceplane and discuss that as well as the Shuttle Mark II. I won't discuss the Lex spacecraft. That's too basic. So, yeah. Those are some of my efforts, but let's start with this. In a recent video, I featured this, our first spacecraft of the day, which is the Goku spacecraft. And the Goku spacecraft, named, of course, after the Dragon Ball Z character, but I also wanted the name because it can be rendered as 59. Go is 5 and 9. Q is 9. So Ku is 9. So it's also spacecraft 59. And the idea behind this is something that can land on the moon and return to Earth all at once. So it has a heat shield. It lands like this. It has landing legs that deploy like that. And so this is the bottom during the landing, but then, of course, this is the bottom during re-entry. However, for launch and re-entry, if you recall, they sit reclined. So the seat is actually like here and their backs are like there. And so it only has to have the seats rotate by 90 degrees in order to get them in position for landing with the seats at what would be the bottom there, and then the backs like this. And then inside the monitors, there would be two sets of monitors at 90 degrees to each other, and most of the controls would be on their seats, and so would rotate with them. And the wires would go through the rotators, if you will. So they land like this. The windows are such that they would be able to see the ground fairly well. And then there's a hatch up here that they go through and descend out of on the ladder. And yeah, that's the idea. Here are the engines. We have heat tiles on the side here to protect that bit because the engines are a little bit close to that. The RCS thrusters, and it's shaped like a huge pod. It's designed in this variant to fit SLS. It's a Hydrolox thing, so that makes it quite simple. And it has enough delta V to land and lift off from the moon and then hopefully return. I've tested this before, but I think ultimately I use a little bit less of the supplies, and we can only really have 4 people in there, not the current 6. So that's a bit of a problem. But yeah, at some point I tested this and it worked out. But that's the idea. It is an integrated lander and return vehicle, no docking, just direct there, direct back. And the reason I created it was for the tourism series, where I just wanted to get them to the moon quickly. So I had a solar system tourism series where my Twitch live stream audience could book flights to the moon, and this was an easy way to get flights to the moon. I don't think it needed all the ablator either, so that's another way to get extra delta V. But it does require something that can get it to the moon even though it's like 50 tons. So that is the trick, and that's why I like SLS Block 2. We'll get to... Oh, why don't we discuss SLS? So that's Spacecraft 1, Goku Spacecraft. Spacecraft 2 is the SLS Wet Workshop. So the SLS Wet Workshop is what happens if you take the oxygen tank, leave the whole thing in orbit, and take the oxygen tank from SLS and make it a crew thing. So inside here we have floors, we have plants, and it can accommodate many floors actually. And the crews can just hang out inside that. But then you ask, well, is it a station? What good is it? What about the hydrogen tank? Well, the hydrogen tank stays a hydrogen tank and we refuel it. And it becomes a nuclear ship. So it doesn't need the oxygen because the oxygen is for things that need oxygen. I mean, nuclear ships only need hydrogen. NTPs work best with hydrogen propellant and only a hydrogen propellant. So down here we have a custom thrust section. And it doesn't look great compared to the Artemis construction kit or Sobel's SLS mod, but that's because I made it for this purpose quickly. And it has a center slot, you'll notice, and the reason it has a center slot is so that it can accommodate one of the actually just the regular NTP from NASA, but we could put a Timberwind in there and tuck it in a little bit. But actually it's not meant to have such a big engine. What it is meant to have is this one, this NASA NTP Architecture 2019. I'm sure there's a note inside there, but anyway, it's like that, and then they'll have the RS-25s from NASA's Space Launch System on there, 4 of those, and hopefully they'll remove those because we don't need them. And on launch it'll drain this of the oxygen, and we'll have to purge it of oxygen and get some nitrogen in there. But after you get rid of all the oxygen, if you do refuel this tank, this hydrogen tank, and you take off the RS-25s, you end up with a spaceship that has 8,083 meters per second if you can keep this from boiling off, slap some, clear off the foam or glue on the foam, and then slap some MLI layers on. You'll have to do something about the foam because otherwise it'll just fly off. But yeah, we then have a spaceship with quite a lot of delta V and crew accommodations, a large volume of crew accommodations, and but then we need to have supplies as well, so it's not gonna really be 8,000 or anything like that. Probably could do with some ion engines as well. Now, if you don't like the idea of removing the RS-25s via EVA, I mean, it shouldn't be the worst thing in the world. There is another option that I created, and that's a shuttle mice. Now, this isn't a spacecraft to SSME returner. Now, this isn't exactly how it would look, but these little fellows go on the opposite side of where the boosters are. So that might be troublesome with the fuel disconnect, but maybe we can have the fuel disconnects through them. Something will have to happen. Or the pipes. We'll need something to do with the pipes, but we've got these, and they can carry the SSMEs instead, and they can bring them back down. They've got MMH and NTO in order to deorbit, so those are hypergolic fuels, and then they've got slots for the RS-25s tucked in just like that. A little bit close, but very efficient and everything. And then they'll have to have additional control surfaces and tail fin and everything. But otherwise, they're more or less a little pod that brings the engines back home. They'll need landing gear because they actually come down to a runway. That does cut into the overall efficiency of SLS, but that's another way of doing things. So, anyway, this is not Goku anymore. This was the SLS Wet Workshop, and I used it in many videos as well. Notice that you get the Delta V from the nuclear stage with only a 140-ton fuel load. So the SLS itself, if it's Block 2, could refuel most of that. The Starship could refuel most of that. So it's pretty handy like that. And especially if you do have ion engine support as well. One thing this doesn't have on it right now is RCS ports. So that needs to be added on too. Alright, so that was the SLS Wet Workshop. Next up is a modification of a different really large thing, about the same size as the core of SLS, and that's the Advanced Starship. So this was born out of the idea of the really long Starship. They had like the Block 3, which is now Block 4 Starship, which was absurdly, ridiculously tall. And I looked at that and went, well, if it's that long, you could probably use it to spin for artificial gravity and stuff like that, and maybe just make it completely different. So I made it completely different. This Advanced Starship, there are story reasons for this, because I'm always in the back of my head thinking up sci-fi stories that have to do with these spacecraft, and I have a story in mind where this is used, but it's not a prominent part of the story. Anyway, but it's got these solar panels that rotate, those are radiators in the back, and once again we're going with nuclear, most probably in the tail. We're going to have the vacuum raptors around, but then a nuclear engine at the center if the vacuum raptors can be trusted to control the darn thing. On the right side it's fairly light, because we're carrying an overload of hydrogen in order to make sure that so after it uses the Raptor vacuums, it will continue with the hydrogen, and we're also using Hydrolox Raptors. So maybe we could just think about using the RS-25s in a vacuum mode or something like that. There are those hanging out somewhere. Up front, it would carry one of my HAB designs. I've introduced these recently. So these are some of my other spacecraft designs. The habitat for the NTP architecture is actually based on a NASA proposal. Let me just put it in here so it's not a ghost. So it's like that, but obviously that's not meant for this. This is from a NASA proposal. I call it the Marshmallow Hab because it's sort of like a marshmallow. And it's meant for the top of SLS. And it's the front end, the place where the crew is for a nuclear thermal propulsion rocket. So that will have NTP tanks and then the nuclear engines in the back, and assembled piece by piece. So there is that HAB, and then I've talked about these HABs before, but there's HAB 2. Let's not have caps lock on. HAB 2. HAB 2 is a weird one that's sort of meant to be based on the 2001: A Space Odyssey front end for the spacecraft to Jupiter, and so it has a pod bay. It's a open front. It's a smiley face pod bay though. It's a friendlier sort of spacecraft that's going to kill you. Let me try and have it over here. The one that's actually meant for this is HAB 3. So HAB 2 is like that, and then it has additional floors, like this HAB 2 level. It has the supplies accurately calculated as well, so we don't have more supplies than we could physically fit. And these are the additional levels that it would have for crew to hang out in. So that's HAB 2, and that was built to accommodate also the pod, which I suppose I should introduce. That's another spacecraft. This is the pod for pod bays. It's a really tiny little spacecraft, but it can carry a Kerbal for a little while. And it acts like the claw. So those claws in the front, those are claws. You can arm them, and it'll arm like the claw, and it can claw things. They've got, and the pod's got little hydrazine tanks in the back. It's just straight hydrazine, and RCS thrusters and all that. And normally it'd have a docking port at the bottom, so it can dock to the inside of the bay and undock, of course. So that's what goes into HAB 2's pod bay. And then we've got HAB 3. HAB 3 has many components, and it was meant for Starship. One way or another, it's meant for Starship. It uses these HAB levels again. The HAB levels do have sleeping berths, an exercise machine, and computers. And then we have this thing. This should shift down just a smidge. And then this is an escape pod crew cabin. So most of these are laid out as if they're going to be... Actually, they should be reversed, because if it's spinning, this side is the bottom. So this they should be flipped around. But let's set that aside for now. But the crew cabin is arrayed for launch. So that means that this side is the bottom and that's the back. Well, wait, I mean, well, this side's the bottom as far as where the gravity is. This side's the bottom as far as their seated orientation. So anyway, as far as which side gravity is coming from, it's opposite from these. So that's important. And it's an escape pod. It's got the MMH Mon 3 for its escape engines. It would have parachutes on top. And this is an airlock part, so that they can get out. But you can see the escape engines there. They're based on the Starliner abort engines. So, same thing. So, that's how that spacecraft looks, and that's the advanced Starship. Meant to use hydrolocks, nuclear engines, and actually you'll notice the empty portion there. It's supposed to have ion engines there. So it has a set of ion engine tanks. The advanced Starship Xenon tanks go like that, and then some ion engines would go over here. And the idea is that if this is all spinning, the solar panels will rotate to face the sun still, but then we can use the ion engines while it's spinning. We wouldn't be able to use the engines in the tail at all. And probably the Raptor vacuums should be removed or something like that. And if we can't use the Raptor vacuums for control, then we will just fit Raptor sea levels back there. So that, again, is not the Goku. That is the advanced Starship. So that is a very complicated idea indeed, and also introduction to the various HABs. By the way, if I didn't want to launch this inside here, there's also a station nose option. The station nose is meant to attach to there. And put this off to the side. Yeah, the station nose can cover this, so that it can launch on its own. And I've used this many times. This extends as solar panels, so it has solar panels here for power, but it also has rudimentary propulsion, RCS, and also the airlock part can still open up there, open airlock there, and then we'll have a docking port there. So that is yet another part that I made. Okay, so going with the nuclear theme still, I have the Fuji hydrogen stage. Not really, I mean, it's a spacecraft in that it goes through space, but it doesn't move people through space, well, unless they're the payload. So it comes in two variants, a flatter nose one and more sharp nose one. The flatter nose one tends to be more useful. And I think it was meant for Saturn V. So it's 10 meters in diameter. A bit big for SLS, but still could launch on SLS. And it's got numerous features, as I build into everything. It's mainly a hydrogen tank, but it's got oxygen as well, because people objected to the idea of using the nuclear engines during the launch to get it to orbit. And so instead of having the nuclear engine get it to orbit, and let's say we're using this one, we have these hydrolox engines using the oxygen that we have here, and that alone, if we say don't have this, so just the hydrolox engines here with the oxygen fuel gives us 1,775. So that's quite a lot. That can boost this to pretty high orbit if it needs to, without even lighting the nuclear engine. And if we go one at a time on the stages, so we use the hydrolox first, that even benefits the nuclear engine because we clear out. Of course, right now we're not pushing anything. We would have to have some payload. Let's put on a basic payload here. It's got the RCS thrusters there. They use the hydrolox as well. So let's say a 45-ton payload. That's pretty normal. A lot of the stuff you'll see is sort of baseline for 45 to 50 tons. That is not by accident. And maybe we'll talk about a launcher that is meant for that too. Okay, so that's 45 tons, and you can see we use 1,300 meters per second initially, and then we've got 6,739. That's also deliberate. That is enough to go to the moon, capture in a loose orbit, and then return, and then capture back into a orbit around Earth, bring the orbit back down. So it can go to the moon and come back with that kind of delta V, and that should not be a problem. So, and then we could even use a smaller nuclear engine to get better efficiency potentially. That's about 200 tons though. Something has to be able to launch this into space. It could complete orbit on its own, but not by a whole lot. You can't really leave it suborbital by a lot. So that is the Fuji nuclear stage. And it's got the radiators as well. It is designed also with the ability to capture its own boil-off, the hydrogen and oxygen, and then it can cryo-cool those if it has power. We don't have the power on here except as a fuel cell. We do have a built-in fuel cell, but probably we would want some additional power to cool it off. Otherwise, thermodynamics might not work very well. But anyway, so that is the Fuji hydrogen stage. Continue. Not everything I've made is nuclear, but I'll continue with the nuclear theme with the Grusia spacecraft. This is meant to be a Soviet spacecraft, actually, and it was meant to launch on Proton, specifically. And it used the RD5, not the RD502, this one, RD0410. And the big sphere is the hydrogen tank, the small sphere is the crew capsule, and then we have the engine. I don't know about how much radiation they would be getting like this. Hopefully that there's a radiation shield there somehow. But the engine is a mere 35.3 kilonewtons, and they had this engine. And if you take a look at the delta V, we've got the RCS here. The RCS is just a UDMH and NTO because it's Soviet. And the mass is 17 tons within the capability of Proton, though this is very wide. This is 6.6 meters, so it looks very awkward on top of Proton. And it has enough delta V to go to the moon, capture around the moon, come back and capture into a low orbit around Earth, and then some Soyuz will have to rendezvous with it to get the crew out, is the idea. So that is the pair. I call it the pair. It looks like a pair, but pair in Russian is Grusia, so that's why it's the Grusia spacecraft. So that was another design of mine, and that was used in the Solar System Tourism series as well. Now I had introduced HAB 1, that's the Marshmallow HAB. I had a further development on this, and that was the PizzaHAB. That is this, PizzaHAB for surface bases. And the main benefit to this is, so we'll have to have something land this. It can't land itself, that's for sure. But the benefit to this is it's very deluxe interior. You can see a wood lining, nice table. I mean, this is for a pizzeria. It's meant to be a pizzeria. And then the upper floor is for cooking, and then they'll use a ladder to bring down the pizzas. I made ovens as well. So if we want to blow everybody's mind, props, maybe we'll cut it down. Ah, yes. So I made ovens, I made pepperoni and sausage packages, flour, care package. Where's my cheese? I've got flour, I've got pepperoni and sausage, I've got the oven. Where's the cheese? There it is, cheese wheel. We got a big cheese wheel. All measured correctly, by the way. I got the density of cheese. And so we've got these elements, and in the oven, you need flour. I created the resource flour. It's a thing. You need water, you need meats. This contains meats in the form of pepperoni and sausages. You need cheese, and you need electric charge, and it outputs food and wastewater. So that's how it is. And then we also have the actual pizza. As you can see, I've made a pepperoni pizza, and it actually contains the food. So it is a food resource container, and you can stack them. See, it contains 30 food. It is a 9.4 kilogram pizza, so it's a pretty darned heavy pizza. It's a gigantic pizza for Kerbal food needs, as you can see. But it was all measured out correctly. I got the density of flour and the whole business just to make a pizzeria. Yep. So that's another kind of HAB. How do we get to the pizzeria? Well, we do have the Goku. There is another lunar lander, though. And that is the Kumo. The Kumo means spider, but also in my way of using Japanese words that also are numbers, Ku is 9, the Mo works as 0, so it's Spacecraft 90. The fundamental lander looks like this. It's a very particular size and shape, and that is because that's the only way it'll work. And it does look sort of like a spider. The big tanks in front are the hydrogen tanks, and the smaller tanks in the back are the oxygen tanks, and this basically uses BE7s, maybe a little bit souped up, but I think they're just BE7s on the sides. And it's all very exquisitely balanced, otherwise it won't work, because otherwise if it drains, then the center mass would move, and you wouldn't want that when it's landing like this. It has to be right between the two sets of engines. Somebody at one point pointed out the possibility of one engine going out. If one engine goes out, then the opposite engine will automatically be shut down, so the other two will be able to get to orbit. Since the moon only requires 0.16 thrust-weight ratio, we're at 0.66, so two engines will do the job just fine. What you'll see is that this has 2,855 meters per second on its own. That means that it can't land and go back up into orbit without additional fuel unless it refuels at the surface. So this is designed mainly to refuel at the surface. So it'll land, and then it'll top up, and then it'll go. But if it can't do that, there are special descent tanks. And these will be on docking ports. I won't put them now, but this would dock to it, and I made it dock to it because of the way it would launch. It would all be launched. And with these descent tanks, you can see we get the full 4,800 you would expect for something that lands on the moon and lifts off again. Front end is actually 3 of these hydrogen tanks wrapped together, and then the back end is 3 of those oxygen tanks wrapped together. With its mass, it's not too bad as far as getting it over to the moon. That's important, and we can launch it separately from the descent tanks and then combine them at Lunar Gateway or whatever. That was the intention, so that we could actually potentially co-manifest them on SLS with Orion if it's like SLS Block 2. So that is the Kumo lunar lander. A very, very special sort of design. The Goku is certainly more straightforward and quicker to use, but this is certainly more unique. Alright, well, I think that does it for one video. I've got more. I'll put all the other stuff in a second video introducing more of my spacecraft designs, but for now I think we've all had enough. I mean, I will be continually coming up with more designs, all with their own particular logic to them and their own reason for existing, and who knows what will happen. After all, we've got them catching boosters with chopsticks, so anything can happen, really. With that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.